Busy day, both personal and business. Let's get started. Today we're going to be looking at basically some concepts that are, you guys should know as Scrum Masters, or even if you're practicing to be a Scrum Master. Some of these topics are relevant. I'm going to make sure I can incorporate as much participation as possible. And then others, maybe this highlights. I heard a lot of the familiar stuff from the, the person that was talking earlier, like, hey, did she read my script or something? So that was pretty interesting. Like I said, we're just going to go over that SDLC as briefly as possible. Talk about requirements a little bit. Then the usual stuff like user stories, acceptance criteria, MVP. If you guys want to, please raise your hand if you want to, contribute. Or else I can also ask the floor to, for their insight as well. So that's what we got. Let's see here. So I think this was kind of highlighted, right, from the earlier speaker, from what you see here. This is pretty much in a nutshell, this is what the SDLC is, right? SDLC is basically, it's like this, right? Companies are, like every company out there now has a tech sector. Excuse me, just a moment. Like I was saying, all companies now have a software component to their business, right? So basically, they're always looking to expand or better their processes or what have you, right? So basically, this is how they go about it, right? They will go about how do they get the software or all this stuff that they need in the tech space. And this is how they start. Basically, it starts with requirements, right? So the requirements are basically those things that come from the business. The business are now asking, demanding what they will want as far as getting or whatever thing they need is what is termed by the requirement. And I'm going to go in a little bit more detail than that later. Then you have the design. Basically, this is where it really gets interesting because requirements are basically demands that need a solution, right? And the design is basically what is proposed as a solution. The solution is normally designed by your BAs or your SMEs that you have on the project. And so they create documentation, they create, architecture and stuff like that. Or they might even go right into a list of features or user stories in their presentation as far as that goes. And then the rest is pretty explanatory. There's development, which you got, coding, testing, deployment and maintenance. Basically, this is another aspect, and I believe we have a presentation that's coming next week or in 2 weeks that really describes that aspect, right? The deployment, maintenance, that's more like the DevOps stuff. And this is how what's being produced gets now shipped into back to the customer. All right. Any questions here?
I like our guests.
Any questions? All right. Now, knowledgeable crowd. So let's talk about these requirements, right? So as I have here, this is I got this
requirements. Subscriber.
Again, I apologize. All right, requirements. Was that like interlude music while I was away? Let me see if I can mute that. All right, cool beans. So requirement is defined as a condition or capability that is required to be present in a product, service, or resulted to satisfy a business need. Basically, like I was saying, this is what's dictated from the customer. All right, so it results from elicitations, meetings with the stakeholders or the business. The stakeholders are the ones that, you know, they're either directly or indirectly responsible for that requirement being executed, right? It's not a solution. So the requirement doesn't have the solution built in it. That's why you need talented BAs and SMEs to kind of hear the language of the customer or stakeholder and kind of interpret it so that now we go into our design. So the business is not going to tell you how to go about it. If they present a business need, this is what they want. How does whatever solution is going to come from, be designed from it, you know, that's different. So it's distinct from the solution. Sometimes it's not even defined in the solution. Reestablishing business requirement value. So basically, you can go back. Basically, as these requirements, they go back to the BAs. This means that they do the designs or what have you. You can always take it back. And what happens sometimes, as you explain it, it helps now the stakeholders have a clear vision of what they need or what they want, right? So then that actually gives you a better requirement, better something that you can actually use in this design. So that was that. So this was something I was very familiar with. So, you know, part of my experience was I was a BA, and that's all I did was pretty much, you know, I had to gather requirements. I remember the struggles when it came to finding the right person to speak to in regards to what I needed to take and come up with a documentation or design a solution based on the software that our company was responsible for. And sometimes you come up and you think you have that. Sometimes you have different drafts of let's say a functional design document. You have one draft. It's reviewed then by the client, and you have to come with a second draft and the third draft until you finally got exactly. You kind of gather what they were needed into that document. So that's what that means. That reestablishing requirement value. Any questions here?
Phil, I was just going to add that at this stage, in some organizations, I'll take an example like mine. Like currently, we're trying to build some software in our organization, and the requirements are not going to be provided by a business analyst or product owner, but on the contrary, they need the solution people who are the ones who are the experts in giving us the requirements and working alongside with the Scrum teams, that is the PO, the Scrum Masters and developers, in kind of like filtering out and prioritizing or bringing out a checklist, I would say, so that we can all know.
I'm sorry, Lois.
Yes.
I have a hard time hearing what you were saying.
Sorry.
I don't know if everybody has that same issue, but you could please repeat.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Exactly. Can you please repeat what you said?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right, sorry, that was my earpiece. I was just trying to piggyback on what you said, that at the stage of the requirements, and that I just wanted to give it that just like what you said, it depends on those who are the expertise in kind of like giving a list of the checklist or the requirements needed to build a software, particular product for that organization. In my case, for example, currently we have the solution architects that we are relying on who are masters, and they master the product, and they know exactly what is required for our product owners and our developers to build up the product. So we need to have them in our backlog refinements, which is kind of like a little bit complicated right now because there are just 3 of them. We are in the release train of like 32 teams. And in those 32 teams, we have like, I think 15 of the teams that will have dependencies. So these 3 solution architects need to we're trying to find a way that they can literally be in 3 different backlog refinement sessions and have all the teams get at least a checklist of what is required from each team and what are the dependencies and who are the dependencies to work on that product. So I just wanted to say that in this stage of requirements, in some organizations, you can have the business analyst, you can have a solution architect, you can even have just a product owner who is like an expert to understand what exactly the end user needs. And so if you're answering questions, you don't just rely on some specific names that you've seen in the Scrum books. You just have to understand that in different organizations, you have different masters of, I'll call them masters of the product, or people who have knowledge, or how do you call them again? Jesus, that name has escaped me. No.
SME,
Jesus,
subject matter expert.
yes, that's the Jesus. How could that term escape my memory? I think I'm tired.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that was perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I use the SME generally, right? So that pretty much is it. And what Lois is describing is, you know, within an agile team, the question about what exactly is being asked to be done in the user story, what have you, sometimes it's not immediately clear, and it's good to have somebody in that room, like your solution architect or BA, that actually was with the client, or the PO. The PO, generally speaking, should be that voice of the customer. They're the ones that would have been responsible for the requirements and actually satisfying, you know, those kind of questions, so that, you know, the team, the agile team, will better understand where it's coming from, where the story is coming from, what we're was trying to be implemented in the user story. So thanks a lot for that, Lois. All right, so this is user stories, right? This is something you guys should be extremely familiar with. User stories, as a user role, I want to do this so that I can do that. So that's basically it. And then, like I was saying before, the product owner provides the perspective, right? They're the ones that we would like to task for the creation of these user stories, especially within the agile team. So they're the ones that are looking at the backlog. The backlog has your stories as well as your enablers. Enablers is pretty much from the team. So like an enabler, and I wish I could have included that. Enabler will allow, or pretty much not really a story, but they allow something to happen. So basically, an environment update, or a spike can be an enabler, I think. But it's not related to an actual test. It's not in this format, right? So basically, this user role. So, you know, I'm a cook. I need a cook. So I need some kind of functionality to cook, right? So, and any questions on user stories? Because I didn't want to beat a dead horse on user stories. Anybody have any other insight on user stories, or provide any? And also invest, right? This is something that kind of, oh yeah, go ahead, Priska. You're recognized.
Yeah, Alfred, I just wanted to find out, is it the duty of a Scrum Master to write a user story, or is only the product owner that is supposed to write the user story?
Good question. I think based on some frameworks, right? I believe in SAFe, they do task the PO as for doing the user stories. I don't know generally in Scrum and Agile what that task would be, but we'll want, and this is it, we will want the PO to do it because they're like the customer representative. Now, as a Scrum Master, you should know what a user story is and how to write a user story, and help the PO, because you might face a situation where the PO doesn't know anything either. So you don't want to be stuck in that situation, and you want to, and this is a chance to help someone professionally, because you never know, right? And help them with this user story creation. I've been on teams that the tech lead or the lead developer was actually doing the creating the stories based on what was going on as far as what the customer was kind of giving. So so they might like this. So he creates a story just to modify something, and then it's reviewable by, of course, your PO. And if it's a go, it's a go. So as the Scrum Master, you're gonna be you want to know how to write a user story. So basically, you want to hear the requirement, and you want to even ask questions to the PO, like what exactly are we trying to do, what's going on. You can conference in a tech lead, because your developers may have some insight of what exactly the customer is even trying to talk about or trying to implement. And and so then you start, I've been in this situation before. You start to, okay, well, could you say this task, you want to be able to do this because you need this for this, right? That you will probably be, but you should be in that room, right? If there need be, if the PO is struggling with that. But yeah, you're right. The PO is responsible for user stories.
Can I another input if you don't mind?
Sure, Ivy, go ahead.
I think all that you said is completely correct, but I think and this is just purely from experience, and I know not everybody is going to have the same experience. I know when I started a few years back, my PO was writing the user stories, right? And what I realized is as the team started working through the ACs, or just kind of completing the work, a lot of things were coming up, right? And later on, when I stepped in, it was, well, the PO, that's basically how she told us to do it, right? So it was always like, well, the PO said. So the approach that I kind of coached us to go into, and I think has been working, and our whole digital team kind of adopted this approach, is the PO is responsible for the business value. That's why we call them the business, right? Because they come in with the customer's perspective, which is the business part of the product, right? What the customer needs. But as far as like the tech specs and what needs to be done within the ticket, a lot of times the PO doesn't really have the in-depth technical knowledge for that, right? So just so a lot of the back and forth and bugs coming up and all of those things can be avoided, I think it's good practice to kind of have the whole entire team. So the PO comes with the business value, which is usually just the description and maybe a couple of ACs, but not the whole entire thing completed, right? So then presenting that to the team and say, hey, so this is what we have. What else do we need? That giving the team an opportunity to also look at things from their perspective, because the customer might even want something that can potentially not be done, right? So if we just go ahead and take what the PO brings initially, then a lot of times we end up kind of writing back code, or basically giving something that the customers is not necessarily useful.
Yeah, well,
as far
that will kind of give an indication that the PO is not a really good PO, right? Because you got
no. I mean, I agree that the PO should be responsible for the user story. They are responsible for it. Should they write the entire user story? Maybe not, because then that would force a PO to be technical, right? In a sense.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so basically, so as to interrupt you, in that moment, then the PO, when the team does bring, you know, either by conference or whatever, like try to help the PO create the story, and let's say they go ahead and create this, it's then reviewed by the PO, say, look, is this what you were looking at? Is this what we're trying to achieve, right? If the PO is the front man on that, it will be yay or nay. If not,
Right.
that's fine. I mean, it depends. Excuse me, it depends on the budget or the time you got. But you can. There's always, you want to always leave space. You know, yeah, we need to tweak a bit, or that's not exactly it. We'll probably need it this way. That should be fine in the Agile. That's why companies like Agile.
Right. And also, so that a Scrum Master is not also put in a position to, you know, there are a lot of times where I had to play PO and Scrum Master, right? So in that sense, the PO is not present. Who writes the ACs? Who writes the acceptance criteria, right? Is usually the team. So kind of, if a Scrum Master know that you can't code, and you, a lot of times you don't understand the tech specs of the work, right? Presenting or giving the whole team an opportunity to kind of speak on the stories. I personally think it helps. I think it's good practice to get involved, to have the team get, especially the devs, get involved, because at the end of the day, they are the ones doing the work, right? So, but I think all your points are right. The PO owns the user story, but I think as far as contribution and writing it, I think it can be a team effort.
Right, and you will want to coach that anyway, right? You want to coach your team to, you know, pick up that kind of slack, and, you know, if they have questions, you know, you want to have an approachable PO so that, you know, things can kind of gel. So, yeah, that's good input there, Ivy. Thanks so much for that. Anyone else? Oh, I see a lot of chat going off. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much in tune of what we're saying, I guess. Okay, I wanted to, does do most people here know what invest is? Who could tell me what that I in invest is? Don't all speak at once, or you can raise your hand as well. Okay, you guys can cheat if you want. Like, come on. The I in invest. The I in invest, I'm going to help you. It's independent.
Okay, I know
I is
that.
independent. So what's that mean for a story? Well, why would we want that independent? Or what would that mean? Go ahead, Shelley.
So that it's like connected to the specific ticket.
Okay, so it's you could say like a story can be for two different things, I guess.
Yeah, just so it's more specific.
You can say that.
Yeah.
Who else has your hand raised? Abamahat or Abba Med.
Uba. Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say for it to be independent from any dependencies, no other, I guess, it shouldn't depend on any other stories to be done for it to be worked on.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that. That's pretty much it, guys. Independent. Next up, What's N? Who knows what N goes? Go ahead.
Negotiable.
Negotiable. Good job. Well, what's that mean when we say negotiable, Iris?
It means that the story can change at any. It has to be flexible if the goal of the sprint changes.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to expand on that? Right. So yeah, negotiate. It's pretty. Yeah, you're right there, Iris. You also want to think of, conversations, right? You want to talk. You want the give and take that comes with, or the prioritization, basically. Those kind of aspects. Like, think of when a user story is introduced. Right. Go ahead, Ruby. Ruby, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I think the negotiable user story should encourage collaboration between the customers and developers. They are not a close contract and should be open to adjustment as necessary. So that's how to make a user story negotiable. It should be open for adjustment within the sprint.
Mm-hmm. Very good, Ruby. Iris, you have some other insight on that?
No.
Okay, you just raise your hand for the next one, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Next one is valuable. What do we mean by valuable? Why is this an important attribute? Iris, would you like to tell us what the...
Yeah, valuable. It has to bring value to the business. At every sprint, we need to be able to make increments.
Cool. Anyone else? I think that pretty much sums it up, right? Priska, go ahead.
Yeah, I think valuable is the story should be able to give value to the customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Priska. Thank you for that. Yeah, pretty much, guys. Yeah, the value. What's the value? I mean, you hear that a lot in that agile space. There's valuation in everything about your team, blah, 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 blah. But now when it comes to this user story, you want a translatable value being, whatever the business need was from the requirement being translated into that user story. What's the next one, guys?
Estimable.
Estimable. Thanks a lot, Kay. Kay, what's that mean?
It means that given that we are working in increments, we being the team, is it the case that we are picking up stories that we can finish within the sprint? And by that, we are looking at story points. And so what amount of heavy lifting is each of those stories? And is the heavy lifting, going to be completed at the end of the sprint?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice try there, Kay. It's like that, exactly like that. So estimable pretty much means what Kay said. To summarize, looking at the user story, can you look at that user story and say, yes, this can be sized. It can be, we can see it being done in this amount of days. It has this kind of complexity that's involved, and you know, the time involved, what have you. You can actually get that from the user story. The user story is supposed to be able to be estimable, right? Because you're supposed to get that kind of, you know, information from the user story. That's what that means. Next, what do we got? Khadija, go ahead.
Small.
Perfect. Small. What do you think we need? What is meant by that?
Yeah. A user story to be small enough to be worked on.
Small enough to be worked on. So you can only have small user stories?
What did you say?
You can only have small user stories?
Well, if it's in big chunks, like you should always like break it down so that it can be easily worked on. And yeah, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. That's
Just,
exactly that.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, but you want to complete it by saying that it has to be small enough to be able to be completed within a 2-week sprint. You want to add that because it can still be small, but probably not completed in 2 weeks. So you want to be specific. You want to use a story that when you write it, estimable, sizable, and small to be able to complete it within 2 weeks cadence. If that's the time frame in your organization, which is mostly the time frame for most organizations, then you want that user story to be able to be small enough that it can be worked on within 2 weeks.
Thanks, Louis. How about you, Ruby? What do you understand by small?
Yeah, I read somewhere that says a user story should be small and detailed, and it should be able to be worked on within 40 hours of work. So I think, but I'm hearing again say within 2 weeks of work. I don't know.
Yeah, that is a little bit confusing. So to help Lois and Khadija, right? When we say user stories small, right? We're talking about how we can divide. Is it in this the story itself? We want to divide it into its minimum state, right? So like the story can fit in a sprint, right? Just because it can fit in a sprint, have we satisfied invest? No. If you can still split it, if you can still split the story to 2 different stories, you know, because and this also goes back to the first one. It has to be independent. So basically, you can't have a user story that kind of does this and that, you know, within the which is possible. And I've seen it happen where they just put in a user story, or you're working on a story that has, you know, a couple of functions, and that's not agile. In fact, it doesn't satisfy this. You want the user story to be it's divisible, like you can divide it. You cannot divide it anymore, basically. It gives it a finite, independent value. So that's pretty much what is meant by small. Khadija, you still have your hand up. Did you want to tell me what the next one is? No?
Hi, testable.
Testable, thank you. What's that supposed to mean?
All stories needs to be testable in order to be done.
Okay. Who else wants to try?
It should meet the acceptance criteria when it comes to testing it.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Or is it doneness?
Yeah, it's pretty much as you said. You should be able to test it, or like if they give you the story, the next question is how do you test it, right? How do you test it? And that's again, based on the acceptance criteria that kind of flows into that, because once a user story is defined, you have a description, you also need an acceptance criteria. You also need an acceptance criteria to satisfy that acceptable requirement, right? So very quickly, that's what the acceptance criteria is. So like here, there's a thing called, well, over to the right, you got this. This is pretty much like you will probably find in most acceptance criteria, right? They say given this, when this, then the expectation is this. That's the result. So if I click on this, and on this page, this should populate, or, you know, given when then, given when then. That there are also automated scripts. There's different syntax for that. So that's encouraged, especially if you have a team. You can say, you know, because that was my first. That's what they pushed to me. Like one of my first gigs, they pushed that to me. They showed me an AC and they said, Humphrey, is that the way we need to do it? Like, and I was like, well, what do the testers say, right? Can you test it? Can a tester see the AC or the acceptance criteria, and from that come up with a test script, right? And so sometimes you can find the ACs written in the test script or in a Gherkin syntax, because it's going into an automated script. Any questions on that? Any questions? Card conversation and confirmation, that's what I got from the Scaled Agile website. Basically, you got card, basically like the user story is a card, right? And this is kind of like back in the day, before this was all a remote world, you know, you have this stuff on a card and it will describe what have you. But now, conversations, right? The conversations that might be evolved from that, right? So basically, and this has something to do with user stories as well, but in creating the acceptance criteria, once you kind of get what the customer is looking for, and you can run by that sequence what the expected outcome should be, and that's pretty much what that conversation is. And then of course confirmation is the actual what is written down then as your AC. So that's pretty much what 3Cs are. Any questions? Khadija, you have your hand up. Shelly, you have your hand up.
Yes. So in my role, I'm currently working as a Scrum Master and a BA. So I have been asked to write acceptance criteria. And I understand this is called the Gherkin format, right?
You can have, I think there's a little bit more to it, but that's pretty much it.
So using this format, you're able to basically implement it in any environment, doesn't really matter what it is. So my question is, how can you like just make sure that your acceptance criteria is strong enough and clear enough for the developers and for the clients?
Oh, well, I can answer that. Does anyone else want to answer that? when so basically from the so once you write your test script, right? Or that's kind of how because even as a BA I used to write test scripts. So the test scripts will have to satisfy basically whatever you're trying, whatever the story is supposed to be, right? So how do you know? Well, does it satisfy the user story, right? Once you create the test, right? And the developers say they're done and they run it through the test, and I've seen this, you can either refine the test right there and then, basically, if it didn't capture certain things, right? So that's kind of how that works, where if it passes the test, then pretty much the story is done. If we're not, or, of course you have to deploy it to, but once it's demoed and basically as a complete story or a complete task or what have you, that's how you know that the test worked, right? And if it didn't satisfy what was required, right? Like, and that's a retrospective, right? What happened? Basically, we have a story that came down. We follow whatever needed to be done. There was an acceptance criteria. And this was what it was. The acceptance criteria is reviewed by your PO. The acceptance criteria, especially if you have it in this format, is like, okay, given this is the outcome. And the PO, sometimes maybe they'll get it right away, maybe not. But once it's demoed, right, it makes sense. And again, demoing and the PO frowning on it, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. The PO will then come back to the team and kind of, this is what I thought. Could it be like this? Could we do this? And this and that. And that helps the business. The business now, and like I could have mentioned that earlier, the business sometimes derives requirements from the finished product, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that works. So, again, if we got most of that correct as far as that invest goes, it'd be kind of hard not to get the right bases. I don't see this would be the more challenging thing. I think the more challenging thing would actually be creating a user story over the AC.
Okay.
Was the question that she writes user stories and then she has to write test cases too?
Yeah, write test cases. How do you know your test case is okay?
Okay. Yeah, basically the ACs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right. We have a good crowd tonight. Thank you, guys. So lastly, I wanted to talk about MVP. So very briefly, and this is what I got from Scout Agile, and there's so much you could say about MVP. I couldn't really find a real definition that I could find, but the MVP is an actual product that can be used by real customers to generate validated learning. What do you think it's meant by that? Who has an idea? You can feel free to say whatever. What it's meant by this? Why would a customer need an MVP? Oh, QF loves that definition. Yep. Scout Agile knows better than me.
So can we kind of, what does an MVP stand for? I think that may help them understand maybe.
Minimum
Good
viable
question.
product.
So MVP.
I am
Thank
free.
you so much for that. The
Minimum
MVP is minimum viable product, right? Minimum viable product. Sorry about that, gang. Minimum viable product, abbreviated as MVP. What is the minimum value product? The minimum value product is an actual product that can be used by real customers to generate validated learning. QF, did you have something to?
Yes. So I think breaking this down, when we say viable, then that means something is actually capable of being used or is successful in being used. And that's why I've always kicked against Henrik Nyberg's MVP from a scooter to delivering a car. I don't think that is a very good definition of viable. So viable is something that you use to gather feedback on time from customers by releasing it out to them and getting feedback on time, so you can either pivot from your delivery or increment on what you're delivering. For example, you're trying to build up a website for a customer, and what they can just do is just to get past the login phase into the application. Maybe for the login, they want it to be in a way that is more user-friendly. At least you get the feedback, then your team goes back and increment on that, or possibly change the user experience completely. But then it's something that customers can use at the first end and give you the feedback, so you can increment on it or pivot. Yeah.
All that and above. Thanks for that, QF. Who wants to add to that?
Yeah, that was a really, really good kind of definition, or kind of like the path to MVP. So working with a lot of, consulting with some organizations, what usually an MVP does is it kind of gives it, mostly internal stakeholders, an idea of what this big initiative is or what is coming, right? So giving them the product itself. And sometimes it can be, like he said, something as simple as being able to get past a login page, being able to sign in, but it's a valuable product, big enough for a customer to use, but it's very seldom that it's actually out there in the public. A lot of times, I know my organization, a lot of MVPs, we are the first stakeholders to get it. Well, after executives and internal stakeholders, we are actually able to test it out. And then we have certain customers that we actually build cases for to be able to test out before we release to the public, because we're in a retail company. But a lot of organizations start off small, deliver it to a smaller group of people. That's what we call an MVP. And based on feedback from those stakeholders, you're able to develop it or learn from those development and enhance it before you do like a bigger release, basically.
I in practice, I've seen MVPs pretty much your highlighted story, right? That this MVP is highlighted such that that sometimes who comes to the review, it's just not your PO. There's a lot of stakeholders that would like to kind of see what is what's being produced here by this team. And sometimes it's best to produce to let me see it. Let me see what this will look like if you did it, right? So that's what, and again, stories can come from it. Stories that say, oh, can we then from this do this, from this, or refactoring. So refactoring is a common thing that comes with an MVP that's at least impressive, right? Because oftentimes, right, when from that requirement, from that SDLC process that I described earlier, the customer might not, it'll be hard to believe that they know exactly what's going to be produced, right? And so that's why MVPs are important. If the concept is pretty much definitive as far as what they want to have produced, and then it's produced, they can see it then, whether it be impressive or they want to add to it to improve it, which means more work. That's kind of how that will work. Anybody else want to add to that? All right, cool beans. Well, I think that's it that I have for you guys. Any other questions from what we discussed? Or is there anything you want me to go back and elaborate a bit?
I'm gonna hop off in a bit, but this was a really, really good presentation. It was really well put together, and I think a lot of these very Scrum technical things are what we need to be looking at. Just, you know, I've been doing a lot of interviews, and these are some basic things that I feel like, you know, a lot of Scrum Masters should know, but a lot of us don't really have an idea what these things are because we haven't had the experience yet. So yeah, thank you for the exposure. It's really good.
Well, thank you for tuning in there, Ivory. And that was important, right? And preparing this, because there's some very basic things that we as Scrum Masters are trained on, right? And that's fine, but sometimes it does help your story, right? It does help your story if you know you kind of understand some of these things and how it comes like, you know, requirements. But I could have gone over this for a while, right? And even when we talk about the SDLC, and I believe it was actually Lois that was going to like big time detail about that, and she could have gone on and on. But these are things most of the time that it's not exactly trained, well, where, you know, we're just trying to get a test or pass a course to make sure that we have the basics for the Scrum Master role. And that's why I like doing these presentations, because because one of the main things that they didn't tell you about being a Scrum Master is that you still gotta be learning, you gotta still be reading, you still gotta be attending meetings like this, you still gotta be, you know, a lot of it is learning, and you know, you'll find yourself also trying to understand what your developers are, because you're in a position where they hear you, you know, you're now in a position to help them, right? And you always want to be an insight or even ask smart questions as far as what they're doing, right? So that not only makes you look good, it makes you more a part of the team, right? Especially when you know stuff like this, and this avenue, this makes you a better partner for your PO.
Humphrey, I just wanted to add that for the aspiring Scrum Masters, in addition to the point of the acceptance criteria, it's important to know the difference between the AC, which is acceptance criteria, the DOD, which is the definition of done, and the DOR, which is the definition of ready. And some interviewers, they would usually want to ask you, so what's the difference between the DOD and the AC? You want to know the difference because it's a little bit tricky if you don't know the difference. So you want to do more research and study on that, so that at least you know that there's like a key difference between those two, and you know exactly what you're talking about during an interview.
What is the difference between the DOD and the AC? Right? It doesn't, if the story passes, basically satisfies the AC, is that enough for it to be done?
You're asking me the question, you just
I'm asking you. So basically, I could ask you a different way. If it went through development and then it tested and testing is complete, is it done? Is the story done?
Yeah, well, I know that basically there's a key difference, because in the key difference is with regards to scope. The acceptance criteria is definitely with regards to the end product, which is the entire product, the pieces of work individually. The acceptance criteria is pieces of work. Each piece of each increment cannot have the same acceptance criteria, if I'm making sense.
No, but the acceptance criteria is specific to the story, right?
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. It's specific. Okay, let's say, for example, we're building the car. The acceptance criteria to get the tires, it's not going to be the same acceptance criteria to get the wheel, the steering. I don't know if that makes sense.
Kind of, because those would be two different stories.
Correct. But the definition of done is for the entire car, meaning that everything has to be to meet the definition of done, meaning that we can now say that the car is completed. Does that make sense?
So in other words, you're saying whatever it means to be done to get the tires,
to get the entire car filled up. Whatever has to be done for us to say that this car is ready to go to the showroom and be sold. That's definition of done. The acceptance criteria is that what do we need to make sure that the tires of this car has met the acceptance criteria, and we now know that all the tires of this Toyota or this Mercedes-Benz is ready. What do we need for the steering, this Mercedes? What design do we need to say that, okay, this is the design we need? What do we need for the chairs? Those are each pieces of the car. Now, when the entire Mercedes-Benz has been built, we now see everything that has been put together. We now say, okay, it has met the definition of done. Everything is ready. We can now take it to the showroom for the end users now to, test it, drive it, and see if it's good to go. So that's the key difference. It's the scope.
Anybody want to add to that? If an interviewer dare ask me that, I'll say the definition of done depends on the team, right? The team defines the definition of done. And it could be exactly the way you put it. I'll say, like in my team, once it satisfies this, it's done. The AC is a description in a user story that satisfies what it means for a story to work, given when then. Priska, you had your hand up.
No, you said what I wanted to say, because I'm like, the definition of ready and the definition of done is just like the same vocabularies, but they just want to sell the thing, because I don't see the great difference in it. So I don't know. I just wanted to say, like,
it should be, define it, and that's why I asked it that way.
You mean the definition of done and the acceptance criteria? That's what you're trying to say, not the definition.
No, and the definition of ready, the DOD and the DOR.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about it. What's the difference?
You said that is the same thing to you, to the DOR and the DOD?
I feel like there are just English words that these guys are just making the course to go. Like when you want to renew the course, you have to bring in some new vocabularies. I don't know.
No, it's not about vocabularies. The reason why it's good to have a definition already, it's because when you're doing your backlog refinement sessions, you want to make sure that everything that is needed for that user story to be moved into the Scrum backlog has met the definition already, which means that if we're refining our stories, like for example, depending on what software you're using to track your workflow. In my case, for example, we use Jira. When I'm doing my backlog refinement sessions, when we take each story, each ticket, as they call it in Jira, we want to make sure that that particular user story, it has its description, it has the acceptance criteria if we need to put one, it has the estimation already put there, we know already the sprint that it's going to be moved into, we know how much work has to be done. Let's say we have a checklist of the definition of done, if possible, or definition of ready, whatever you're doing, but depending on your team. But now, when we have put all that in place, then we consider that story is now has met the definition of ready, which means that during our sprint planning, I don't need to come back and revisit that story with my team. All I have to do is to just move it into the sprint because we have already refined that particular story. And that's what we call it, the DOR. It has met the DOR, meaning that it has met the definition of ready to be moved into a sprint. That's what it means. It's ready to go into a sprint. The definition of done means that it has attained and it has completed all the requirements for it to be set or to be considered that it's now a functioning, or whatever you guys use in the Scrum words, shippable, valuable, increment that's met that definition. We can now test it and all of that.
QF has put in the definition entry criteria for a story to be accepted. I like that because it has simplicity here. So DOR entry criteria for a story to be accepted for work by the team, and DoD exit criteria for a story to be delivered.
Perfect.
Why that is important, right? Why that is important is because the key word there is criteria, right? This is what's agreed by the team. So, and this is a simple definition. So if you guys are looking for a simple way to answer that question, it'll be this definition that QF just shared, and you can expand on that. Basically, the entry criteria. Our team, our definition of ready is as long as there's a story with a description and then AC is on it. I ask my team whether they understand it, and the PO was able to answer all their questions. It's ready. DoD, basically when the team has finished all its testing and they're able to deploy it into dev and it's tested there, and they do a review on that process, then, there's a code review, and that code review is a go. That story is done. So yeah, you can make it very, very simple. And that's what's crucial, especially if you're learning this thing, right? I really like that definition. I'll definitely use that.
Yeah, Humphrey, I got a little question or a little twist to that, right? This is all I mean. Yes, definition of done, like what is the exit criteria is not for a story, for an increment. Like the analogy Lois used, if a car is ready to be delivered to showroom, that's why you use DoD for a car. But for peculiar to each story is acceptance criteria. So when the PO is accepting a story at the last day of the sprint during review, he uses the acceptance criteria to accept each story. Definition of done is to accept the increment in total, not a story.
Correct.
Point of correction.
That's it.
What's the accept increment mean?
Say that again.
What's it mean to accept the increment? What's the increment?
So increment is the totality of whatever you're working on, which comprises all the stories you're working on in the sprint, which is why definition of done is something the PO and the team members come together and agree what definition will be. Mind you, acceptance criteria is also part of definition of done. Definition of the totality of the increment, whatever you're delivering, is not peculiar to a story. That's what people always miss.
So basically, if the definition of done is the total, all the stories have to be, considered, and then you have a done.
Yes. For each of the story, before the PO accept each of the story at the end of the sprint, what is the PO used to accept the story is the acceptance criteria, right? As agreed. Test has to be done, no defect, a couple of other things. But for definition of done, the best analogy was what Lois said about the car and the wheel, right?
Correct.
So the wheel is acceptance criteria. That's what you used to accept each of the wheels and the tires, right? Then the whole car, which is the increment as a whole, is definition of done. So let's get it straight. Definition of done is not the exit criteria for a story. It's the increment in totality.
Right. Because bear in mind, they are building a product, an entire product in increments, meaning that they can take a 2-week sprint. Let's just use the analogy of the car. They can take the 2-week sprint to build and configure the tires. They take another 2 weeks to ensure that the interior of the car is built. They take another 2 weeks. So we are talking about, for example, depending on how long they need to take. If it's like quarterly, let's say we're taking 1 PI to build the entire Mercedes-Benz. So it's at the end of that PI that we now, just like what the previous speaker has just added to what I said, we are now saying that, okay, it has met the definition of done. This car is ready to go. It has met the exit now. That's exactly what I was trying to explain. So as I said, it might look small, but those are tricky questions that sometimes interviewers use, and especially if they want to know if they exactly understand what you're talking about, they can bring it. I never knew the importance of the DOR until when I joined my organization. I saw that they don't even know about it. I can be proud to say that I introduced it to my teams and to all the other release train teams, and they started using it during the backlog refinement, and they saw the importance of refining their stories ahead of time and making sure that it meets that DOR. And that's just why I said that it might look small, but it's something you want to put in your books, you want to put in the back of your, agile vocabularies, just in case. I always say no knowledge is useless. Anything that you can grab and add to your agile knowledge, it's very important.
Absolutely, Lois. Yusuf, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Just going back to Loy and Alameen. So what's the difference between an MVP and an increment then? If you're using that analogy of using a whole car as an increment.
Good question. And now we'll have to use a different example then, because you need to use something that maybe in this case we can use like for an MVP, I can use an app in the iPhone. Let's say, well, what can I say? We can use something that we're adding to, let's say, WhatsApp. Maybe WhatsApp never used to have the option of emojis, let's say, or never used to have the option of video calls, or you could just chat with WhatsApp. And MVP might be that. Let's start with the emoji. Let's give one emoji and see how customers react to it. And they start saying, oh, this is nice. You can always send an emoji. This is nice. And then they realize that, oh, so emojis are nice. So instead of creating only the smile emojis, they start creating all kinds of emojis now. So that's the MVP was just one emoji that was sent out just to see how end users. I don't know if I'm
So
using
what
the right example.
The reason I struggle with that definition by both you and Alan was is that if the assumption is that one team basically creates the whole vehicle, right? Where there could be multiple teams responsible for that.
Correct.
Right? And there can be multiple teams. In fact, there's I don't know, there might be, but there's always going to be multiple teams working together to a common goal, right? Or towards towards the contribution of a product.
That's why they are dependencies.
Now, when we say that until this general product is made and it's reviewed or whatever, that's when it's done. Like, it's not defined by the team. The team doesn't define what done is. It's what everything is. I struggle with that. I've never heard it like that before.
Sometimes it's the organization, Humphrey, that gives the definition of done. Sometimes it's the entire organization that say that this is the definition of done, depending on what they are building. So
I have a question. So making decisions for what is done for the customer, what is that now the point of your stakeholders or your customers?
That's the part that I wanted to chime in, because when it comes to DoD, and yes, the team can have a definition of DoD, but how happy is the customer and the stakeholders during sprint review?
Oh, basically, there is, or you should, in an Agile team, have that internal review, right? So the team reviews by demoing, or at least announcing a completion based on some back-end stuff, maybe not demoable, but you'll have a demo. The PO sees the demo. And if the PO is not a center point, maybe they gave the requirement or user story, but other stakeholders are involved. Other stakeholders come and see the demo, and they review the demo with the team upon completion, right? Upon, when the team says they're pretty much completed whatever they needed to complete, and if the PO gives the okay, like, yeah, I like it, or, yeah, we could finish it here, but could we, do it? That's where the customer comes in, right? That's where the customer
So
comes in.
so the DoD now is defined by the PO and not necessarily the team.
It depends on your organization, right? Where I work, the DoD is determined by the Agile team.
Yeah.
And that's how it goes. We say this story is done when this happens. This happens, the story is done.
I think that foundation is set. As a Scrum Master, when you join a team, you set that foundation, right? As far as, okay, what do we consider a team as done? As far as I think we're all saying the same things, but in different ways. And I think some people are also thinking on like a program level. So basically, definition of ready, think about it as, just talked about invest. Before, it basically what it means, it's ready for what? It is ready to be committed, right? So the work has passed all of the invest criteria. Now the team is ready, the work is ready for the team to commit to it, right? Now, the process that work has to go through is the definition of done. So going through, code review, PR request, testing, and then the PO approves it, then we call it done. That's how I pretty much understand DOR, DOD. Now on the program level, it's completely different, but I think everybody's kind of saying the same thing, but in different ways.
Yeah, like Lois and Alan and I talking about it on an organizational level.
Right,
and
right.
I never heard that before.
But let's not also get confused with when we're talking done. Let's not get confused with the swim lanes. When we're working our workflow, that's some other thing that some people get confused. When you move it to the done status, you say it's done. That's not what we're talking about here.
Go ahead, QF.
Yeah, so my contribution is most organizations they kind of set the bare minimum for DoD. That some teams they kind of build build off their own DoDs from, and they build on it because that is at the program level. Now DoD is also engineered by the team and the product owner as well, because DoD as it is also a living document. You want to imbibe stringent quality into what you continually churn out as a team. So DoD is fashioned by the PO and alongside the team. And what you have as the DoD doesn't just stay the same throughout the life of the team. For example, we re-engineer our DoD every quarter as a team attains a level of maturity, and this kind of also helps the organization with delivering quality products. So for me, DoD, I understand the fact that we have very varying opinion and of varying views, but for me, DoD for my team is the exit criteria, where anything that is going into production or that's going to be released to at the program level as a level of quality that we don't have to rework. So that's it for me and my team. So every quarter we go back to our DoD. We look into it. Okay, so what can we do better? Okay, we have enough understanding now. So should we increase our code coverage and some other things like that? So, like we said, every organization has got it differently. But Alamin, you did say that DoD is for increments. Where does an increment come from? It comes from the story that the team is working on. Increment is not just something that just it's not just something that is wishful. An increment is as a result of the stories that the team are working on in smaller bits till they're able to deliver something that is functional or usable by the end user. So that's what I have.
Exactly. That's what I was kind of like with Lloyd's explanation about the car. A car is like an initiative. Are you breaking it down into epics and features and then user stories? And then user stories are supposed to be increments, if I'm correct.
Exactly.
And there's no right or wrong answer. It's your organization. I always say, if you can back up your answer, if you can back up your answer in an interview,
Yeah, you're right.
he's not going to be arguing with you there. That's your organization. And trust me, we
True.
all work in organizations that say that they are doing agile, but you and I know that some of the things that they are really applying, the practices, they are not really agile. But hey,
Correct.
That's your organization. We defend it, and if you can defend it well, the interviewer is not going to stand there and say that, oh, that's not what it is in the book. She says, sir, I'm telling you that that's what happens in my organization. If you can defend it well, then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's understandable. It's just adopting ways of working and what works for the company, because you can't practice agile to the team. You just have to refine it and what works for the team, and that's how we move forward. Constant improvement.
That's what I always say. It's a mindset, it's a framework. If your own frame is circle, my own frame is square, my own frame is triangle, I mean, who cares? It's still a picture in there.
Mm-hmm. Cool beans. Victoria, I think we're done. He's not here. Hey, who wants to talk about more about interviews and stuff? I'm all ears. Any other contributions?
Does anybody have like safe experience in what happens in PI planning? Like if you as a Scrum Master, what are your roles? I know you probably have to do a pre-planning, and during the PI, you have like 5 or 6 iterations and stuff, but going in depth, not like trying to have a long conversation, but just in like 2 minutes, what can you just give somebody to be like, okay, well, this is my responsibilities. What do I bring to the table? What are the sets of requirements or things that I need to bring into the into that meeting prior to the meeting?
I was actually about to ask something very similar to PI planning as well. And also if you could start with the inspect and adapt process to begin.
Okay.
Are you people in the, sorry, I was going to ask if they are in the WhatsApp forum.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Oh, okay, because something was shared, that's fine.
I think PI planning is when you really shine as a Scrum Master, right? So when you are just pre-planning, right? So basically from my experience, basically when we are planning, my biggest concern is, do we have, what exactly does our backlog look like, right? So I will prep, and this is something sometimes like my last iteration, I was able, where we knew what we were going to do, like from one PI to the next, but there was times when I had to make sure that we did everything we could. I was, tugging on BAs, PAs, and POs, making sure like, hey, have they paid attention to what we have in the backlog? Is there something that we need to, look at? Backlog refinement meetings are that sometimes we have to clear up the stories that are there, and this also put pressure to find new requirements, a new story, new increments of value that could be implemented in the next PI. So that's like my number one thing is the backlog, and then basically finding out, and this is tough, but getting your team to confirm when they're taking PTO, right? So you have to make them confirm when they're taking PTO so that you can get into the capacity planning. So these are things that you do before there's even PI planning, right? Basically, once you have a backlog, at least, right? At most, you can start shuffling these things into sprints before PI planning, right? But at least you have the a backlog that's been looked at, prioritized, etc. And then the next thing you want to do is make sure that you can then allocate capacity. So you start to plan sprint by sprint exactly where your capacity is going to be. And so that's pretty much your pre-work. And then for the event itself, because we're remote, you want to be sure that, you know, I actually run 2 teams. So I always try to get somebody to help me with the mural board that we use for the whole art train, right? And also somebody to help me record the breakout sessions, right? Because our breakout sessions are recorded. And I always forget to record them. So I always assign somebody to record it. So that's how you prepare for the PI session, all right? So during PI planning, so basically once you get that set, right? The PI planning is about the team now coming up with a draft plan. This plan is then reviewed once it's finalized. Once you, a final draft plan, or that's stupid, a final plan is what is produced, right? Or what is viewed by the rest of the business. And what this plan entails is basically all the stories. So all the sprints with the respective stories, enablers, maybe even bugs in every sprint. Like we have the stories, we've seen how it matches up with capacity and the load, basically what we made sure that, because sometimes your sprints are a little bit above capacity, sometimes a little bit above, you have to be able to speak to it. So it's within, you have all that. Then from that, you have PI objectives. PI objectives is that what is pretty much the increment that the business is looking for, right? And it's a phrase that kind of describes what are the overall goals of this team in this increment, this sprint, this next 2.5 months. So that's what the PI is about. The PI objectives are about. You'll also highlight your dependencies, right? So some of these stories have risks, and these risks, let me not say risks because that'll confuse you. These dependencies now, we call them dependencies because it depends on work from another team, right? We have conference with that team. We conference that team. They said they're going to complete this story this sprint, so we're going to do it the next sprint, right? So that dependency is in the next sprint. Or you don't want this, maybe it's in the same sprint, maybe you have to do, but whatever. Those dependencies are highlighted in your plan, as well as your risk. What if there's a risk? Is there a knowledge risk? Is there new people risk? Is there sick risk? Whatever that risk may be, all those risks, and then you kind of grade them, whether they're resolved, mitigated, accepted, or I forgot what the other one was. It's wrong, it's resolved. I don't forget what the other one was. But so that's that with that. So PI objectives, all your stories and stuff allocated to the sprints, your dependencies, and your risk comprises of your plan, right? So that's what you do. That starts first out. Day one on that first breakout, that's what we're trying to get to. So basically, you're coaching your team to say, okay, what are we doing? Could we do this story? Could we do this story? Could we do? And again, if you did a proper backlog refinement meeting, most of these stories, your team is already acquainted with those stories, right? So it's a very simple process. Okay, let's do this in this sprint. Let's move that to that sprint. You're prioritizing. You're putting stuff into sprint, and before you know it, you're ready to talk about the PI objectives and stuff like that. And that's how I do it. Sometimes the next morning, I'm pretty much putting the final touches, right? That means I have everything that I had described before for my draft, for my plan. So that's basically how I go about it. Does anybody have any questions on that? I kind of spoke a lot, but I didn't. That was pretty much unscripted. I was just speaking.
So just a quick follow-up. So after your PIs, at the end of you have five 2 weeks iterations. Every 2 weeks iteration, do you run Scrum as the whole ceremony?
I'm sorry. What was that? What was that question?
Okay, so you have five. What'd you call it again? 5 iterations for the PI planning, 10 weeks. And after the outcome, you guys finish the PI planning, and the outcome is, okay, 5 weeks, this is what we're going to deliver. At every 2 weeks iteration, as a Scrum Master, do you run ceremonies in that 2 weeks iteration? Do you run Scrum?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, it almost sounds like, the same thing over again, but yeah,
like to have memories like
when
hey.
when you do have these within the sprint, you should have your ceremonies now. You should always have the sprint planning meeting. So basically, even though you've already allocated those stories in the sprint,
right,
we're still looking at, in our sprint planning meeting, we're still looking at them if it's still ready, right? You can still do that, and if everything's, that sprint planning meeting could be very short, right? So you just go ahead and get the sprint started already. And so that's pretty, I think that's what your question is. And yeah, it could get kind of weird because you've just talked about this. We just knew that these things were happening. But sometimes when it comes to the second or third or fourth sprint, you need a little refresher as far as what's needed here, what needs to be done. Is it truly ready to be taken care of in this sprint? So that's just so that I think you were specific on the sprint planning meeting. But the other meetings, of course, you're gonna still got your DSUs, your retros, your reviews.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hey, Katia.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to PI planning. So I just joined this organization and they have never done a PI planning. So they want to start now doing PI planning. So they have 10 applications that are working on different things, but they want to bring all those 10 applications together and then do a PI planning. So the details that you went on about PI planning, is that we can start with that? That's the best approach to do?
I'm not even, I don't know what approach you're describing. You said there's 10 applications. These guys never did PI planning.
Yes. Yeah, so because first you said you start with the backlog, right? The program
And I'm only
backlog.
talking about my team, right? I'm readying my team. Yeah, because the Scrum Master, you're only talking about your team. So yeah, you get the backlog ready.
So what is the best approach to do for that?
a organization that is starting a new PI planning with 10 applications.
Mhm. Well, you're the as a Scrum Master, you're also the the Agile coach, the Agile expert. You're supposed to be telling people, say, hey, we need to be doing some refinement meetings, right? So each team needs to be doing backlog refinement. Their backlog refinement, or producing at least a backlog that is prioritized. So let us prioritize our backlog in preparation for our PI planning event. And it's just like I said, like you're going to say, we need to do this. This is you, the Scrum Master, the Agile expert, telling your other fellow Scrum Masters or people, managers or whatever. Like we need to know what kind of work we're expecting going forward. So there should already been requirements gathered and stories that need to be placed in our backlog. So you as the Agile expert would like to voice that. That's how you get your organization ready. You can be that voice, and then you can show them how to prioritize their backlog.
If I understood her correctly, you mean your organization is scaling Agile, which means they were not yet a scaled Agile organization. So they are about to scale up into say what it is?
Yes.
Yeah, so like just to add to what Humphrey said, you can be the voice, and probably you want to tell them that they will need an Agile coach to, first of all, an organizational Agile coach, first of all, and they need a release train engineer, because to lead all those teams, they will need to be in a release train. And for a release train to be well facilitated and well led, it has to be led by an RTE. So
that's what I was thinking about. Yeah.
You want to
but see, Kadia, you can be that RTE. When you start talking like that, say, hey, I can show you guys how to do a backlog refinement. And they do be like looking at you like, hey, you can show us, tell us what to do.
I get
and then
them all those
you're the RTE. They'll give you the, hey, you know what? You're going to show all these people how to do this. And basically, then it's easier. All you have to do is show 5 people how to do backlog refinement. And there you go, Kadia, instant promotion. That's what I'll do if I were you. Like, hey, if this is the like I said, the PI planning, PI planning is an opportunity for a good Scrum Master to shine, right? That's an important, because once everything, you have all your ducks in a row, and especially during PI execution, right? You don't got no stories rolling. You satisfy all your objectives. That's the Scrum Master. That's why you shine as in PI planning. That's why I take it very seriously. Like the sprint before, how my backlog looking? Start talking to people about PTOs and trying to get that plan in order.
So I was going to just give the last advice to I don't know who was the one asked the question that they are Kadia. So when I joined my previous organization, that they were calling scaling to Agile, the first thing that the organization did was to hire an Agile coach and equally a release train engineer. And the first step that they did was to do a workshop, a training for everyone. Everyone was supposed to be on that call, and the Agile coach and the release train engineer, they did a kind of like the Scrum Alliance. If you've seen a Scrum Alliance release train engineer training, they actually did a whole training of the PI, did a training, independent training of the role of the Scrum Masters during the PI, the role of the product owners during the PI, and equally even the role of the release train engineer, and what the release train engineer's role is, the system architect. Everything was being discussed during the workshop. We had like a 1-week workshop where every day we had to connect. There were some days that they said only Scrum Masters were supposed to connect on that call because it was going to be strictly a workshop for the Scrum Masters. Another day was strictly for the product owners. And then there was like 2 days during the week that was for everyone, so that we can have a walkthrough of what the PI and what a PI is and how it brings value to building increments quarterly. So that's something you want to, and like I said, you want to put that out there to them, because for some organizations like mine currently, we send out a book of work. The book of work is where all the initiatives are and where you build out all your epics for the depending on how many iterations you have. Our organization go right up to 6, sometimes we threaten the 7 iterations, depending on the schedule of the year. So depending on your organization, you will determine how many iterations you need for the PI. Yeah, the Scrum book says 6, but I can guarantee you that sometimes you have people go right to 8 iterations or 7 iterations. It just depends on your organization.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great question there, Kadia. Who else has anything to add before I wrapped up? I think I've been given the power to end the meeting. Anything. I give you guys another 10 minutes of my time. No, nobody? Okay, well, let's do this, right? Let's have a retro. What do you think, as far as this meeting goes, right? What did we do good in this meeting, right? So I'm gonna put the question in the chat, and everybody just go ahead and chime in on what we did well, right? Chime in the chat, right? What we did well in this meeting. Come on. What we did well. Or what did we did good? Organization was good, cool. What else? Excellent presentation, okay. Good collaboration. Everybody was given a chance. I do that a lot. Basically, when you get better in your job, you have a time, because basically we needed a time box, you know, speeches and stuff. So I have a timer in my head. So I allow, and this is what I do in my teams too, I allow people to speak, keep speaking. So that's something to have. Great questions there. Yeah, I learned a lot. That's why I love doing these meetings. Patiently responding to questions. Discussions were open. Yep. We love that here. So, all right, cool. Anybody else? What didn't? Thank you. What's that in-depth explanation? Well, yeah, very detailed answering questions. We had Lois was very gave some really good insight. So did Alamin and who else? Yusuf, QF. So there were some Scrum Masters in the house that helped us a lot. All right. So going on, what didn't we do well? What didn't we do well? This is critique, self-critique in French. What didn't we do well? We started late, and that's on me. That was on me. I had to pick up my kid. I had to. I was driving, and I was supposed to be 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late. I ended up being 20 minutes late, so I apologize. Didn't respect. I did respect. Oh well, some people didn't. Yeah, Lois didn't. She spoke out of turn a lot. Went beyond time box. You did well. Beyond time box. Again, yeah. So yeah, Lois was a little long-winded, but again, she didn't speak more than she needed to, right? So I was able to interrupt her politely as much as I could to the next speaker. But yeah, it is what it is. I always look. The meeting ended on time. The meeting did end on time, so I was within time. But I'm sorry. We won't take that criticism because I had the meeting done on time. There were many things that didn't do well overall. This was an amazing, but okay. Lois. So Lois is the one that didn't go well. Is that what that means?
Humphreys, I think you got done in like at the time box. You just gave us the luxury of answering more questions because
Yeah,
you didn't
absolutely.
You'd have left.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know you were kidding. Okay, cool beans. And what would you like to see next time? So, and then what would you like to see? So this would be in your retro, this would be improvement items. What could we improve on, right? What can we improve on? Oh, there we go. The WhatsApp link is in the chat, guys. I didn't even know you could do that, but thanks a lot for that, Kurt.
Oh, you're welcome.
Like, so improvement items. What can we do better? What can we do better?
Humphreys, you got that Jay-Z voice. Can we get a verse?
You know, I used to rap basically in high school.
Yeah, drop a verse.
I can't rap no more. I can't even freestyle anymore. I can't. Even though I really want to now, but now it just can't come to me. I'm getting old. Don't do it. Yeah, I won't do it. What can we do better? Come on, we need improvement. There's a thing in Agile called relentless improvement. You have to think of something.
Yeah, I think we need more participation. You know, people got to participate and, you know, just keep trying. If you make a mistake, you get corrected and you get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Lois, you need to join the facility. You have to the facilitator link. I wonder if I could do that. I should be able to do that. You know, go ahead and and always chip in to facilitate. I could literally facilitate every week. You know, I have obvious distractions, but I can facilitate every week. But I always allow other people to do it. All you have to do is scroll out there because Kirk is just amazing with that. Thank you, Kirk. Anything else? What can we do better? What can we do better? And before I forget, let me see if I can get that facilitator link. I know. I don't know. Will I be able to share it? Yeah, I can't. Copy. So here, this is for the, you guys can always volunteer, basically go into that and put in your name and the day you want to maybe have a list of popular interview questions that are commonly asked. Yep. When we have those kind of meetings, basically, I'm prepared with some questions if you I did one a couple of weeks back. Interesting. Well, you can join. So hold on. You can join the Telegram. I like the Telegram group better, if you ask me. Let me get the Telegram group. I'll see if I can share that too. You guys can join that. Link. I think that's how you join the Telegram link. All right, gang. I just posted the Telegram link there, and I'm going to call it a night. Thank you all for joining. It's been great. See us the next bat time, the next bat channel. That's hopefully we can have one again next week. That's always depending on whether we have a facilitator or not. So good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.